We are a packed house, very excited. My name is Sam. I'm here with $2 Radio headquarters. Again, we are very excited to be hosting events, but just a few things as we get going. Please remember that for COVID, while you might be comfortable with current protocol, not everyone is. So if anyone chooses to socially distance or wear a mask, please do be respectful. The kitchen is officially closed, but the bar will remain open for drinks, so if you need to, head on over and we will get that going for you. If you need to use the restroom at all, they are located around the corner there. And then now for tonight's event, please join me in welcoming writers Amy Spears and Sam Tucker to the Unicorn stage to celebrate their new collaborative memoir, Collective Chaos, a Roller Derby Memoir. Following the reading, Amy and Sam will be in conversation with writer Mandy, oh no, I should have asked you how to say Shunnarah. You were so busy. Part sports autobiography, part cultural critique, Collective Chaos offers the collective experience of a tenacious group of non-traditional athletes who play, officiate, plan, schedule, market, and manage the business of a mostly women's amateur sports team. This modern sport, with its alternative punk rock culture, is often a place for those who've struggled with the mainstream. But even as a sport, is often home for historically marginalized groups such as the LGBTQ+ community. Roller derby organizations and participants often mirror and experience the same inequalities as those in the world surrounding them. In a full-contact theatrical sport that some consider revolutionary, the authors show that gaining truly radical self-knowledge is an ongoing, difficult process that requires love, teamwork, discipline, critical consideration of one's local and global societies, and, above all else, one's place in action within them. Amy Spears graduated from Denison University with a degree in cinema and creative writing. She lives in Columbus, Ohio, where she is in her second decade as a skater with Ohio Roller Derby. She spent several years active in the leadership of Women's Flat Track Derby Association and has given presentations, workshops, and talks about the sport at Columbus, the Roller Derby World Summit, and RollerCon. Her digital essay, Worlds Collide, Facebook Family, and George Costanza was published in Heartland, a revealing look at the arts of persuasion, and her prose and poetry have appeared in Columbus Alive, Lynx Eye, and Wine X. A self-described collector of hobbies, she'll try just about anything once. Sam Tucker is an anti-racist teacher, writer, and editor in Columbus, Ohio. Sam writes personal essays, memoir, and cultural critique, having earned her MFA and MA in creative nonfiction. Her essay, Fountain Girls, originally published in Ecotone, is listed Notable Best American Essays 2017 and is anthologized in Contemporary Creative Nonfiction and Anthology. Other essays have been published with Lit Hub, Columbus Alive, Bust, Brevity, and Guernica. In her spare time, Sam loves protest, mutual aid, roller derby, and karaoke. I just like to make up things. Mandy is an Alabama-born Palestinian-American writer who now calls Columbus, Ohio home. Their essays, poetry, and short stories have been published in the New York Times, Electric Lit, The Rumpus, Entropy Magazine, and others. Their first book, Midwest Shreds, Skaters and Skate Parks in Middle America, is forthcoming from Belt Publishing. And finally, one last thing before we start, we do want to acknowledge that the land where $2 Radio headquarters is located is the contemporary territory of the Shawnee, Miami, Hopewell, and other indigenous nations. We would like to pay our respects as well as honor the culture, heritage, and resilience of these and other indigenous nations with strong ancestral ties to these lands, as well as individuals from indigenous backgrounds in our community who continue to call Central Ohio home. Now, everyone, please join me in welcoming Amy and Sam.
Thank you for $2 Radio for having us. So just as a show of hands, how many people here have either played Derby in the past or are currently playing roller derby. Okay, so I need everyone else in the audience to take note because that's who you don't want to pick a fight with. You will lose. So we're going to have Sam and Amy read from their fabulous book. You haven't read it yet? What are you waiting on? Oh wait, it just came out today. You're in luck. There are lots of copies here, so definitely get a copy, go home and immediately start reading it. I finished it in like a day and a half. It was so good. So we're going to hear from Sam first, then Amy. So I'm going to turn it over to Sam.
Thank you guys for coming to an Ohio roller derby practice. You guys had to be here. Okay. I'm going to just read some parts that are kind of like my roller derby origin story. So, if I had been told as a kid that someday I would break my back while consensually participating in a full contact sport, I would have guffawed. I don't use that word lightly. Guffaw feels like a clunky exaggeration in most contexts, but I know with complete certainty that if someone walked up to 5th grade me, a freckled bookworm with a snotty vocabulary and nonstop craving for Cheetos Puffs, if someone had whispered, "Sam, put down that book about the Bermuda Triangle, do I have a story for you?" I would have guffawed. I would have brayed like a little blonde, clumsy, sports avoidant donkey. I never had any sports heroes. My little brother Ronnie had them all. I have tethered the worst period in my life to the best sport in the world because it's how I remember the time. Destruction, then derby. In 2008, the stock market crashed, so that was a thrill. My then fiance and I left New York City for Colorado, that's where I'm from, hoping familiar proximity might insulate us from complete financial despair. I was 23 and trying to plan a bargain bin wedding while applying to every single job available. I couldn't land any of them. I had graduated from college in 2006 with a theater degree, I know. But in 2008, everyone was firing, no one was hiring, and ill-timed rhymes made everything that much worse. In 2008, the same year Flo Rida released the single Low, health insurance in America was, oh sorry, go ahead. Yeah, give it up for Flo Rida. Yeah. All right. Health insurance in America in 2008 was as elusive, exotic as it had ever been, and many of us hung all our frantic hopes and dreams on the potential of our first black president. We've come a long way. Then in the spring of 2008, just 2 weeks after I had abandoned my New York City dreams and returned to Colorado to mourn and reassess my life goals, my brother Ronnie, the kid with all the sports heroes, was killed in Iraq. I thought of nothing else. The phrase on loop in my brain as if I could make sense by thinking it once more. My brother was killed in Iraq. My family was gutted. We had unquestioningly served in the military for more than 3 generations, not due to patriotism so much as inheritance. And both my grandmothers were what they call war brides, having met my granddads while the men were on duty in Korea and Germany. Suddenly, everything I thought I knew stopped making sense. What does on duty mean if it's in the service of state-sanctioned violence? How much say did my grandmothers have in their own lives when war both made them poor and also provided their only opportunity for upward mobility? Would my family even exist without the unquenchable American thirst for war? Where I grew up, surrounded by 3 military bases and a whole lot of red, white, and blue, the Army was the local, dependable employment option, a way to find stability and health insurance, to pay for college, to get out of our own small town. It's nearly impossible to be critical of war when war is a quotidian way of life, when war is framed as not much more than work. After his death, all I could think was, why was he there to begin with? Why are any of us, ever? Americans, knowing or not, bask in the luxury of war over there, on someone else's land. My brother was killed in Iraq, so were hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians just trying to live their lives. War is as constant and far-reaching as it is abstract and local, forever and invisible, illegally made and economically sound, and mostly happening for someone else until it isn't. I was consumed by the loss of my brother, by the loss of anyone made collateral damage by the powers that be. I stopped living in the world in an apolitical fog. I started asking questions that my family, my community, and most of the country did not want asked and could not answer. My grief left me untethered, left me in desperate need of something solid, tangible. I needed lightness and purpose, ease and power. Skate City's rink on Academy Boulevard in Colorado Springs smells vaguely of cardboard pizza and feet. You know the smell. Though these might be the same smells overlapping, it is surely the familiar smell of all skating rinks in America. The inner rink walls are tall and blue shag, early proponents of safety carpet in unexpected places. Everything else gleams cinder block white or painted neon, an occasional ballet bar bolted waist high for people in need of additional support. On skates, I am not one of those people. That's a lie. You guys should have fact-checked this book. In 2010, every late Thursday evening, an eclectic group of roller skaters paid around $6 to skate fast and learn to skate faster. The group, casually led by a former near-Olympic speed skater, featured women anywhere from 18 to 50-something, and a few dudes other than our volunteer instructor. Some folks had previously speed skated on ice, others were inlines against my better judgment. I am prejudiced against inline skates. It's very hot and I don't want to get angry. I bought some high-top cocaine white disco wheels at a thrift store for $5 and brought them to the first speed skate practice I attended, which was a real amateur dumbass move. The instructor looked at my skates, then my face, then my skates again. His eyes bugged a bit. I believe he was forcing himself not to roll them clear to the back of his head. He mumbled something about ankles. I got the point. Red-faced and flap-sweating, as usual, I discoed over to the skate rental counter for a more practical, appropriate boot. Bend your knees, our leader called across the rink. What followed was an exercise in controlled chaos. Effective skating form is about precision, but where precision was lacking, I excelled in a new reckless optimism. Flo Rida insisted over the speakers, Shorty got low, 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 low. There's two more. Low, low. Imagine the difference between a steel rod and a steel rod with several well-placed hinges. Imagine the unbending rod pushing vertically upright, but horizontally shoving through all that atmosphere. The hinging rod instead bends and glides through space, rides the horizon, uses its surroundings instead of fighting against it. I heard the instructor remind us again, knees should remain soft, bent, the body nearer to the floor. I heard him say, keep your back at 45 degrees, drive your legs out laterally rather than forward and back. I heard all of this, but I retained nothing. My head and heart and hinges stayed, hijacked by that single relentless thought. My brother was killed in Iraq. As we queued to skate the diamond, the fastest way around an oval, cutting in tight to the short curves, gaining speed at the lengthy edges of the track, several tattooed women noticed my inelegant speed, like a headless chicken on wheels, and my natural talent in occasional stopping without the use of a wall or my face. As we stood in line, we stretched to remain warm and limber for the next race whistle. I was working out a leg cramp, but one of the coolest women I'd ever seen mentioned the Pikes Peak Derby Dames. I had no real understanding of women's flat track roller derby as a full contact sport. It was easy to get caught up in the attire, in the eyeliner, the ripped stockings, the punny skater names, and the overall theatrical aesthetic of the sport. But above all else, modern day roller derby is a rule-heavy, legitimate, and not performed full contact sport. The sport can be as physically and mentally demanding as, say, outpacing a global financial crisis or coping with the hideous fallout of war. But unlike money or justice, flat track roller derby is real. Like, real. When I first learned of the Pikes Peak Derby Dames, it was approximately 5 years after the modern day Women's Flat Track Derby Association formed by Amy Spears. We'll get there.
Untrue.
WIFTDA, the now international governing body of our sport. This was also several decades after the performative, pro wrestling inspired bank track version that could be witnessed after Saturday morning cartoons. When the cool women approached me, I wondered what it would be like to be someone else. Like a Sam who was sexy and sassy. A Sam who looked like she would not hesitate to beat your ass. The word sexy and sassy rounded out my facile understanding of roller derby players, so when the very cool woman added, tryouts are here at Skate City in a month, I dared to picture myself as a derby player in a variety of situations. Me with a helmet covered in anti-war slogans and maybe also a unicorn sticker. Me at a bar, clothed in punk rock, having survived great loss, but in a sexy ass-beating sort of way. I'll be there at tryouts, I said. And because I was 25 and lost and mourning my brother, I went home and I purchased $650 of gear with a credit card, equal to the amount of a month's rent in my subsidized apartment. I ordered Rydell quad skates and knee and elbow pads and wrist guards and a mouth guard. I ordered a sticker of a gold star flag, a military service flag showing I'd lost someone at war, a real conversation starter of a sticker, and I slapped it on top of a sleek black helmet. Later, I paid way too much for the same flag, quarter-sized, tattooed on the delicate inside of my wrist. I was ready for combat, which is an inappropriate and ludicrous phrasing giving my brother Iraq, anti-war radicalization and all that. But it's how I felt when I suited up and practiced skating in our dinky apartment's galley kitchen. Ready for combat. I was ready for a potential new identity, even if I had to buy it in installments. My mother was extremely annoyed. "You don't have health insurance, Sam," she said, and sighed as though she might blow the whole idea away altogether. My family was not doing well, all of us floundering to find a new normal in a world post-Ronnie. The toll his death took on Mom was beyond measure, and so we all did what we could to soften other possible blows. The last thing I wanted was to create more worries for Mom. That said, I was determined to manage my own despair, even if it entailed new dangerous hobbies as a coping mechanism. I promised Mom I'd be careful, reminded her I'd had no health insurance since I'd turned 18. Missing health insurance was no great deterrent. Being uninsured in America is as American as being uncritical of the imperialist disaster that is America. And now, a word from Amy Spears, who invented roller derby.
So those of you who are not on the inside do not know that is a joke. I did not. And that's also not the chapter I rated today. But most of the book goes back and forth between Sam and I, kind of telling our derby stories, and then my other job, being the old lady here, is to tell the history of Ohio roller derby here in Columbus. So that's where we're at. In the beginning, way back in 2005, to become a skater with what was then called the Ohio Roller Girls, you had to do the following. Observe one practice, start skating at practices, usually on those horrible brown rentals, until you were able to buy your own gear online and have it shipped. Successfully complete 4 falling drills, which was roughly 8 minutes total of falling down and getting back up again. That was it. I could feel our more recent rookie classes hating me a little, as they spend anywhere from 6 to 18 months slogging away at practice before they ever see gameplay. But also in just a month or two, most of them are already far better players than any of us in those early years could even dream of anyone being. And the roller derby part is a heck of a lot more sophisticated than the skate fast and turn left of our initial seasons. At the time, depending on how well you could skate beforehand, this process could take anywhere from a few weeks to a year. In my case, I observed my first practice on January 17th, 2006. I had my skates in my hand by January 27th, had my falling drills done at the next 2 practices, and I scrimmaged in early February. I was immediately put into the next team draft, and then I played at our first ever game on April 23rd. A whopping 3 months from win to skating in front of several hundred people who'd paid to see it. Before joining, I'd seen flyers for months, and I kept putting send email to Roller Derby Team on my to-do list, and then ignoring it. Eventually, I ran into a friend from high school, and she mentioned she was playing roller derby in Columbus, and that I should join. I told her I wanted to, but I didn't think I could, that I was so busy, or whatever excuse I made up for myself. But in truth, 2005 had utterly broken me. I'd landed a job that should have been my dream job, and it was not exactly living up to what I was promised. One of my closest friends began struggling with substance issues right as I found out I had a rare condition that meant my ovaries had shut down. And then in June, my ex-boyfriend Todd suddenly died with no warning. Todd was someone I'd met during college at the Denny's my friend Dorothy and I hung out at after late nights editing for our film classes. A few years after I graduated, Todd and I found each other again, and we dated for a short time. It had fizzled, but we'd remained close friends. One week we went to see Nico Case play at Little Brothers together, and the next, Todd's best friend was calling to tell me he was gone. One night at Surly Girl, a now defunct Old West and pinup theme bar, I ran into Foxy Horse, who was right back there. Well, in my brain, she wasn't Foxy yet. She was still Alyssa, who'd I'd gone to high school and middle school and grade school with, and been in the same 4-H group in our small farm town. She once again encouraged me to sign up for roller derby. And in casual conversation, her then boyfriend and I somehow stumbled onto the realization that Todd was the first person he'd met when he moved to Columbus. I don't believe in things like signs, but I'd already felt like Todd's ghost was following me the whole summer anyway, so this felt like him pushing me forward, and I made a New Year's resolution to finally join roller derby. And then, knowing myself all too well, I made a second resolution. Roller derby would be a thing that I would do for fun, and not a thing that I would end up in charge of. Like it would be an outlet, not a stressor. I later told a college friend all this, and his response was to simply laugh at me, just as now, because he knew how I am and how this would end up, even if I wouldn't admit it. Coming in at the beginning, I didn't quite realize that we were still inventing the sport of roller derby. Having seen that blurb in Bus magazine made it feel like this was a thing that already existed, whole and finished, but it was still so very malleable. And since most roller derby leagues and the Women's Flat Track Derby Association were and are collectively managed and democratically run, everyone gets their hands dirty in the running of the day-to-day. Truly, I had no hope of not being all in. I'm not a person who can simply participate in something or who can stand by watching something cry for attention and not get it. To the contrary, I'm very much a fixer and a problem solver. So a month after I'd put on skates, when someone stepped down from our board of directors, the group charged with guiding the direction of our league, I said I would serve out the term. That was in mid-March, and before it felt like I had a chance to even think about it, I was on our board for the next 5 years. I served as a trainer and a captain. I co-signed a loan. I had my name registered on the LLC, and then at a certain point, I eased out of leadership for Ohio Roller Derby in order to take on more responsibility with the WFTDA. That ended up with me serving as the membership officer for 4 years and being elected to a 2-year term as vice president. You know, classic stuff that someone who doesn't want to be in charge would do. So I failed royally on that second resolution, and while it was so hard at times, I don't regret that part at all. As a league, we were nothing if not ambitious. OHRD's first season was held in Battelle Hall, part of the Greater Columbus Convention Center. It was a huge open room with a concrete floor, and the last time I had been in it prior to our first game was my freshman year of college for a 9 Inch Nails concert. Ironically, Foxy was also there. First time we'd seen each other since high school. This was no roller rink afternoon game. To the contrary, we had a professional sound system, and at one point in the season, professional lighting that we were still paying for a full year later. That first game was one of the largest crowds I've skated in front of, even to this day, and the crowd was a motley mix of friends and family, aspiring skaters from leagues starting up throughout Ohio, aging punk rockers, elderly folks who remembered Derby's heyday, and even a couple of folks from Chicago's Windy City Rollers who drove in and guested on the announcer's mic that night. I still meet people who were there that night and never came to another game. I only remember a few things from that night. My very first action was to skate out during our introductions and trip on the rope lights, falling directly to the ground. At one point, I desperately and purposely fell in front of opposing jammer Dirty Mother Trucker and feared expulsion, wondering what on earth had come over me. My uncle, who plugged his ears with toilet paper from the bathroom due to the loud volume, informed me at the end of the game that I had fallen 11 times. I only remembered the aforementioned 2. The atmosphere felt like a circus, and my team won. There were 5 more doubleheader games that season, culminating in the MV Cup Championship. People retired mid-season, new skaters were drafted, we made money, paid bills, broke even, lost money, practiced, attended open skates at Skate Zone, scrimmaged at United Skates, guzzled beer after practice, fought amongst ourselves, made best friends, and had a great time. All the things you expect in any young business or any large group of people who are getting to know each other while also working toward a common goal. That November, we were invited by the Minnesota Roller Girls in St. Paul to play them at the legendary Roy Wilkins Auditorium, which is still one of the best venues in our sport. We eagerly accepted the invitation and started work on creating an all-star team, the best of our 4 home teams, who would face off against the Minnesota All-Stars. While Minnesota had years of experience compared to us, our coaches convinced us this was a very winnable game. This resulted in us being supremely overconfident. When I look back at the score now, 142-55 for Minnesota, it wasn't nearly as bad as we interpreted it to be at the time, especially considering the difference between our expectations of officiating and what we got when we played that game. And also the fact that we had absolutely no experience. We were used to serving penalties and having our opponents do so as well. We entered that game nervous about having a penalty-prone player foul out. But to the contrary, in this game, a grand total of 1 player served 1 penalty minute. They were 1-minute penalties back then, for those of you when one of our opponents grabbed me around the waist and barrel rolled both of us into the Ohio spectators sitting trackside. No one else went to the penalty box for the entire game. Considering we regularly had folks getting to foul out numbers in our home games, to say that this was surprising to us was an understatement. We were not used to having to adjust on the fly, and we did not do so. I can see all of that now, but at the time we didn't have the hindsight necessary. And the result of that game, as well as our feelings about it, would hang over our heads for seasons to come. In those early days, teams would negotiate before games using something called the discrepancy-o-matic, which was ostensibly to help standardize the house rules that each league used in order to make it an even playing field. It was a worksheet with questions like, is passing the jammer a point? Can you legally pass an opponent out of bounds? Is there a penalty wheel to spin for an extra punishment when someone goes to the box? Such basics had to be hashed out before a game was played. There was a standard rule set that WFTDA published, and theoretically, that's what we all played under, but there were differences in interpretation running rampant from team to team. Newer skaters are sometimes boggled when I explain this negotiation because the rules simply are to them. And it's not until they see the revision process in person and see that all leagues contribute to all changes as new versions are published that they realize we are all making this sport up together while we competed among ourselves and with each other.
Okay, so I have to tell y'all a funny and embarrassing story about Sam. So I'd known Sam for years and knew that she was a roller derby queen before I ever actually went to a bout. And then the first one I went to was in 2019. And afterwards, Sam was like just amazing blocker. I mean, it was like doing so good. And like it was my first game and I was like looking up the rules on Wikipedia and like how was this played? I'm trying to figure it out.
It wasn't
and it looked good to me. It looked good to me. And so afterward I'm like, Sam, that was so badass. And I go up and hug her and she's like dripping wet. And I was like, oh man, she must have like got so overheated that she dumped a bottle of water in and then I was like, girl, you did so good. And I'm like hyping her up. And then she pulls out this like tiny little trophy made of like old skate wheels. It's been like spray painted gold and says, I got the sweatiest player award. That's when it hit me that wasn't water. That was all sweat. And she had hugged me. And I looked down and I'm covered in sweat. Yeah. And I was just like, wow, anything that makes you sweat that much, like I'm not badass enough to play. So seriously, props to all of you who have ever even attempted derby, because that's amazing. So we'll start off with the most basic question. How did this book come to be?
Samira Raffer over here. It was Samira's idea. Samira is hey, stand up. Hey, hi. And Beth and Jeff were here too from OU Press. That's who did our book with Swallow Press. And yeah, it was like in the Rambling House, I think, one night we talked about it. And then
it was Saber Growl.
Yeah. Saber Growl. It was like 2018. Yeah, it was a while ago. And I write, like, I don't usually write about roller derby, but that sounded really cool to me. And I knew Amy had talked about writing a derby book before, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so we had, I think we had done at Rambling House a storytelling night for Story Club Bonus. And we did a roller derby specific night, several of us told stories. And then we went to Sabre Corral and talked about Sassy Magazine and Made My Little Heart Glow.
That was the bulk of the conversation.
That's the bulk of the conversation. And then like put it together, and I had kind of like in fits and starts kind of tried to think about writing a derby book before, but had never done it because I didn't really know what had been written yet. And I think that the two of us coming together and being able to write it is like about this whole community, and with our stories kind of weaving in and out was what worked.
So in both of your readings, you talked about how you came to derby through grief. Like you lost someone you loved, and that's what inspired you to start doing this sport. So I'm curious, I would love for y'all to talk more about how derby helped you process the grief, because grief is never linear. It's always a process. So can y'all speak more about that?
Yeah. I think that I just wasn't thinking about grief. I just was worried about getting hit. So seriously, I needed something physical. I needed to be active and busy and out of my head. But also, like, roller derby is it is so strategic, and I think that probably my whole team here tonight most of them are anxious people, generally, except for Chainsaw. But we tend to be overthinkers, and so when you are playing derby, the thing that you're overthinking about is that. And so I wasn't in the same space. I was physically doing different things, and so I was mentally doing different things. And then when it ended abruptly, because spoiler alert, did break my back, I was kind of in a new place. Like, I was still very sad, and like you said, it's not linear, but I just was in a different place. So it just took me out of grief in that way for a little bit.
Yeah, I think also it's, I didn't know it at the time that roller derby was going to become this all-encompassing thing in my life. And like, part of the reason, and I didn't talk about this in the book, but part of the reason I skate under my real name rather than derby name is that this is me, this is the thing I do. And so I think that, it was that initial grief probably that drove me to need a reset button for my life, that I changed a whole lot of things, like moved across town, and I changed my job, and joined roller derby. But then also, like, we talk a bit in the book about different kinds of grief too, that like, later on, I lost both my grandparents, and like, my grandfather had been in an interview on WFTDA's broadcast that prior fall, and so like, having that was actually not even just for me, but for my mom, to have her dad in this video was like this great thing. And then we lost one of our teammates right at the beginning of 2020, which we did write about in the book as well, and like, that's a whole different way of dealing with grief when you've got this entire family of people who also are there with you, and it's not just a sport, it's the thing we live, and like, we're all here tonight, like, it's not just on the track that we have those lives together and are able to help each other through those things.
No, it made me think, like, how did I come to this group specifically? And I think it was in another space where I was like in grad school, felt really stupid, felt like an imposter, didn't want to write my thesis. Donald Trump was about to be nominated, was probably at the very beginning of a slow divorce, and I was walking through Confest and there were all these bing bongs. So it was a similar situation. Yeah, I was having trauma, and that's where I channeled it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm certainly not trying to like diagnose like, oh, every roller derby player has like a trauma story. That's why they hit each other. It's not just a sport. Like, skating is never just about skating, and so it kind of makes sense to me that like grief can be so all-encompassing that you choose this all-encompassing sport too. And to that end, So I'll admit I've never played roller derby and I'm just in awe of y'all, but I also just didn't realize how much off the track work went into making this happen. So I would love for y'all, for the folks who, are not players or maybe haven't been to a game, just kind of give like a rundown of all the other stuff that you have to do to make this happen.
So, we don't have time for that. But I'll give my two pithy quotes about how I describe that to people if I do my little elevator speech. One is that I don't think that roller derby would have had the explosion of growth it did when it did, were it not that Google Docs had come out roughly at the same time, which sounds ridiculous. And it's also what I said when the Drew Barrymore movie came out. I said that was the thing that was missing from that movie that was making it more accurate. Was someone sitting typing into a spreadsheet for a long time at work. But I think that because the internet was what it was at that moment, whether it was Google Docs or whether it was, whatever, social media, it allowed us to share the work. Whether it was amongst us here or whether it was us with Dayton or Fort Wayne or whoever, we were sharing with other leagues and kind of stealing from each other with permission. And then the other thing I tell people about is that we go through a lot of tape because we tape our track down for every game. And we tape our track down in the warehouse, and tape is a very expensive commodity for
$15 fucking a roll.
Gaffer tape and resting that. I know so much about tape, and I'm not even the tape expert in this room. But so it's everything from the business side of things and the legalities of the setting up a business and all that to physically taking the track down and sweeping out our freaking warehouse, which we're spending the next 2 months doing. Is that?
Yeah.
It turns out I've been the head of marketing for 2 years now. I just found that out tonight. The whole board of directors is here. Every person in this room has 6 jobs, whether it's making the stuff that we sell to be able to afford rent of the murder warehouse hell house that we live. Somebody has to call to get the porta potty clean, and somebody else has to call to get contracts signed and keep calling because people aren't signing contracts. And safety, there's a safety person in here. There's everybody does so much work, and it's, we are not paid for it. Monetarily. Yeah, just with love. But I think people would be truly shocked. I would like to see the Columbus Blue Jackets do what we do.
So it really is a labor of love, and that's one of the favorite things that I'm taking away from the book. And as someone who's not from the Midwest originally, I know you're not either, so you'll have to tell me if you're Grand Rapids or but when I think about the Midwestern ethos, it's very centered around hard work, and not necessarily in the capitalist sense, but in the sense of I want to do something, I have to be doing something all the time, or I want to create something, or I want to make my little corner of the world better, for all the other people in it. And so I just would love for y'all to talk about that championship game where y'all are busting your asses, and constantly climbing higher and higher. There's obviously data to support this, and the other side of the Midwestern ethos coin crops up where it's oh, but they're underdogs. They're, people were counting y'all out from the beginning, and just kind of talk about how that made you feel and how you dealt with that.
I wasn't there.
So I guess that leaves me. What I read from tonight, talking about that early game in Minnesota, which is light years away from the year we did this. So what Mandy's talking about is the year we went to World Champs, which in my brain is in all caps, which was 2013, I believe. And it was a 2-year slog to get to that point, and it was very intentional that we had that goal, we were going to do it. And we also had a lot of luck along the way, but it was, I don't know about the Midwestern thing because since I'm from here, I didn't notice a lot of this stuff until actually Sam started writing about that as an outsider. But we definitely had the underdog thing, and I think it came from the early years of like not winning games and feeling like, well, we can't win a game. And like some of these games we were losing to like 2 points. And we didn't need to feel nearly as bad about it as we did. So I think then once we finally started to get to the point where we had a little bit of self-confidence, seeing these other teams be like, well, they got there because blah, 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 you know, they got the advantageous seeding, or they got this, or they got that. It did kind of wear because we were finally learning to believe in ourselves, you know. I don't know what my point is with that, but that was something that I thought about a lot in writing the book and like closing that chapter. In my brain, that's like a different chapter of OHRD, because it is almost, no, it was 10 years ago. Oh my God, it was 10 years ago. So clearly it's very different now. Yeah, and so I think I hope we're out of our underdog moment in the bad sense. Like I hope we have the self-confidence now to know that we can go do that. No one knows what anything is right now because the pandemic kind of ruined the whole idea of rankings and roller derby. So I'm just gonna say yes, we're gonna go do it.
Because you weren't there. So I definitely got the sense that Derby is like a real embodiment of work hard, play hard. And to that end, Neil didn't put this in the book, but because I know so many of y'all personally, I know y'all have some wild parties. So I want to know, what did y'all leave out of the book? What can you share about the behind the scenes fun times? Work rodeo.
I also wasn't there. I missed it. I feel like the parties, some of the like people breaking cabinets and then repairing them that night kind of thing. I think that really was happening right before my time. But we do, like, every party has a twerk rodeo.
Feats of strength.
Feats of strength, yeah, we do feats of strength. We've got like a human pyramid. We always end up doing the dirty dancing lift successfully. Twerk rodeo is the best though, where it's like two people are butt to butt twerking and one of them bigger. Demonstrate. Yes, I'm spelling very. Fun. I wore my gym shorts just for this. Wait, ready? Go!
Thank you for that. Well, and you know, that's actually a really great segue because one of the things that I love about roller derby, at least as a spectator, is that it's one of the few sports I can think of where it doesn't really benefit you to be like rail thin or have like the traditional like quote unquote athlete body.
Does not.
And it's also so very obviously queer, both in terms of gender and sexuality. So I would love for y'all to talk about. I'm loving this like audience.
Right.
So good.
It's just a practice. We should get a
I
practice.
can heckle this.
I would love for y'all to talk about what it was like being in this really affirming and inclusive space and how it affected you as people and as athletes.
I have a fat ass. I always was very, like, the boys in school were always talking about my fat ass, and I felt very embarrassed. I felt like I had to cover myself. I felt like I didn't know what to do with it, and now I got a lot of stuff to do with it. And family was very much like, we're allies, we watch Oprah, blah, blah, blah. I was always like, yeah, I'm here for you guys. And didn't really process my own shit for a long time until I saw a lot of these gays and started to like really understand myself in a different way. This is in the book too, like representation is so important. If you can see it, then you can believe it. If you can look around and be like, oh my God, my body doesn't have to be the way that I tried to make it be for the duration of my friggin' 20s. It's that to me is revolutionary. That to me is radical, and that kind of self-affirmation, it takes way too long, and I feel like if there were more spaces like that, it wouldn't take people so long. Yeah.
I was lucky enough to be on the board of WFTA when we revised the gender policy that we had. So we initially had a gender policy that had very good intentions that was not good in practice, because it basically was modeled on what the International Olympic Committee had put out, and that was that trans athletes would basically need to prove gender via like a hormone level or something like that. And then I think it's a good example of what the community can do to change something. And so when people actually said, hey, that's not half as progressive as you think it is, then we were able to say, okay, then let's fix it. And we went from having a policy to just having a statement, which was no longer like there's going to be like a way to rule on this. It was just simply, if you think you belong here, you do, basically. Like it's worded differently, but and that seeing that and actually like getting to do some of the stuff where we were like on the other side of things that never got released publicly, and like talking to people who were directly impacted by that policy, I think was just like, I feel very lucky that I was able to be there at that time, because that applies to some of the other things that we're going to be faced with and that we'll continue to be faced with. So we're not there yet on a lot of other issues, but like we at least, I think, responded well when our own community called us out on something that was really that important.
Right on. And so the changes that you've seen as someone who's been in roller derby for a really long time was something I wanted to ask you about, because I didn't realize what a new sport roller derby was. I mean, it's under 20 years old, and like when I was reading about your experiences, I kind of put it into context in my brain by thinking, okay, so like basketball was invented in 1891. It would be like having someone who played in the late 1890s, like come tell you about like all the changes that the sport has undergone. So I wanted to ask you, like, in addition to the ones you just mentioned, what are some of the really major things that you've seen kind of evolve with the sport?
So rules, I think, is the one that most people who aren't involved in the sport or who are newer involved will ask about. Like, how do you keep all those rules straight in your head? Because our rule set is created by our players, like across the world, and it's evolved. So season 1, Foxy was a jammer and I was a blocker, and we were joking the other night at practice that I never played offense because we didn't really understand what offense was. But that was also because she could score points if she wasn't in bounds on the track. She could just pass people to her heart's content off the track all day. That's not the case anymore. So it's I think.
Wait, you didn't have to stay on the track?
No. This is the response I usually get. Yeah, you can earn points out of bounds, which was, in retrospect, hilarious. Yeah, but we barely knew how to skate, so. But yeah, like we've seen some major, like that's a really small example, but we've seen more major things happen with like the structure of penalties changed right after the year we went to championships, where it went from minute-long penalties and having minor penalties and major penalties, going to like 30-second long major penalties only, and like I think that you just have to basically like forget the old days and go with what is happening now. But I think it's also been that as things like rules have changed, so has strategy, and so has the ability of players to be strategic. And so early on, so many people came to roller derby who had never been athletes. And I think over time that began to shift, where there was a period of time where it was only people who'd been athletes coming in, and now it's kind of like a good mix. And I think that's honestly helped with being able to like evolve with it, is seeing how the sport itself is evolving and not getting too married to any one, you know, point in time, because it's going to change. We're making it up as we go.
Oh, you want to add anything?
Yeah, mostly just that I think roller derby has been able to change because it is primarily women running it, or primarily people in the LGBTQ community, like people who have been historically marginalized. I think that we have an ability to evolve in ways that, and I mean, this kind of harkens back to the last question you asked you about it being a queer space, it being a different kind of space. Cis straight dudes are not at the center of this culture, unlike all the rest of them. So I think that makes a big difference, and will continue to do so. This wasn't just like a hating on men. There's some. I promise. We actually have some really great cis straight guys in here tonight that work with the league. Thank you. But no, I think that's important. I think that flexibility is based in that.
And what I loved in reading the book was y'all talked about how all the decisions about the sport are made, and at the national and international level, as well as the team level, are made democratically, and how collectivist roller derby is as a sport. So I would love for y'all to talk about how you collectively worked on the book, because I love that it's a collectivist thing, and there are two of you. So what was it like collaborating, and also how did you choose the format of the book? Because it kind of goes back and forth between the two of you, and it's interspersed with player profiles. Really good format for folks who haven't got a chance to look through it yet. So yeah.
I think the answer is Google Docs again, probably. And, I mean, the idea of the book was it was not going to be effective as one person's story. There are a lot of roller derby books out there already. There's what is the Melissa Jewell one? Roller Girl, which is, it looks pretty dated right now. Like the photo on the cover is like an upshot of a person's skirt, and yeah, it's like it's dated, right? And I think, well, just based in my experience of playing and being on the team and running this place, running the league as a small business, like with my friends, none of us have any one version of our time in roller derby, so it didn't feel appropriate for it to be one person's story. Even the player profiles, those were, I kept thinking, like, when I was doing research, I looked at, first of all, Esquire's top 25 sports books of all time, and there's not a single book written by or about a female athlete, a woman athlete. Not a single one. This was as I think it was 2018 was when it was last released. And so I had this idea in my head of like sports cards, or like trying to have record of, like, I'm basically the biggest fan of all of these people in here. I'm obsessed with them. I think they're so talented. I have to be consistently reminded to stop watching the game while I'm sitting on the bench about to go into the game, because I'm like, whoa, man! Like, so yeah, it felt like the format had to be a collective effort. It had to be about everybody's individual experience, because that's what adds up to a team and a successful league and an institution like Ohio Roller Derby that's been along since the beginning of WIFTDA. The project itself started, I think we both kind of knew we were going to go either or, like it was going to be switch off, but it really kind of cemented after the pandemic, when the publishers were like, this is half as long as it should be. And we were like, oh my God, and it's a short book, right? Like, I think that after the pandemic, we were thinking about things differently, and that really kind of changed the format of it. I don't know, what do you think?
I think, in a way, we got lucky in that, like, we couldn't collaborate in person once the pandemic hit, because we actually wrote it largely separately, and like the collaboration was happening in the Google Doc, it was happening in the footnotes. There were so many footnotes that were cut.
Mostly period jokes.
Yeah. Me cursing randomly at things. But yeah, so like it was really, I hate to use the word organic, but like it did kind of, the form grew. I think a lot of the stuff we did once we got to see each other's pages were like going, oh, we wrote about the same thing.
It was surprising.
It
like,
was
having
very
a
surprising.
conversation.
And
Yeah.
so it was mostly about how do we organize it so that it makes sense, given that it's kind of like, there's some linearity, but it's not like one linear story. So we got very lucky in that regard, I think, in that once it came to the time that we, couldn't physically be in the same place because of lockdowns, we were like, we know how to do this. So.
Well, it reads so beautifully in concert, both of your sections in concert together, so I definitely think you achieved that very well.
Thank you.
So I know y'all just had your first bout of the season, which is super exciting, especially since, even before the pandemic, y'all had, just lost your teammate Z, Acid, and then almost immediately things go into lockdown, so it was a very, emotional and trying time for y'all, and you wrote about it so beautifully in the book. So I want to know, what was it like being able to finally get back out there, and how did you feel?
I think that we got a little lucky. Our first game of 2020 was scheduled for the Saturday that basically the entire country shut down. So we canceled that first game thinking, we'll be able to have the rest of the season later on. Sure. Yeah, y'all know what happened. But that game was supposed to be against Steel City, which is Pittsburgh's roller derby team, and that's who we got to play for our first game back. So it was really nice that we basically got to have the same game that had been scheduled, and we had one of their skaters transfer to us in the meantime, so that was a whole other thing. But I think that, we had done 2 mixer games in the fall, our skate mare game where we play against each other, and it's so different to play against other people, and it's so much more fun to play with these people than against them. Because they're difficult to play against. It's much more pleasing to be with them. So I think we were all emotional about it, I think, and it was nice to just be happy about roller derby for once, and not have to think too much into it.
You buried the lead because we kicked your asses! We did a really good job. Look at us. Yeah, it was magical. It was so cool. And it is, that was bigger, was talking about this last week, it is so much harder playing each other because we know each other's bullshit. This torn labrum's name is Betty. Oh, it's so cute. Yeah, no, we are really hard to play against. So kudos to Pittsburgh for coming and they're a very kind team, very fun. We were on the track murdering them, and we were like, do you guys want to get pizza later? And they were like, yeah. So it was really cool. I heard 3 Pittsburgh players walking back to their car. They drove home after, which is nuts to me. And they go, well, I guess that answered our question. Ohio was pretty good.
Which is pretty good. Come on.
Yeah, I was like, I'll eat their pizza.
You eat their pizza, they enjoy it. So Collective Chaos talks about the past 15 or so years of roller derby. I want y'all to speculate with me now. What do you think the next 15 years are going to be like?
Amy's ears will still be there.
I'll be 60.
Hashtag dirty grandma.
Wow. My hope is that we've done a good enough job that it just keeps trucking on, and we don't have to think too hard about it, because we've got our shit together, but also that it's not stagnant, that it continues to grow and get better than it is. What that is, who knows? Who knows what the world is right now? I can't answer that question.
I think it will be gender expansive. It will still be as gay as it is now, hopefully gayer. I don't know how much gay it could get. It's pretty gay. I hope it's not so white We are too white. It's a real problem. I hope in less than 15 years, somebody here will buy Ohio Warehouse because we need a space. I hope that in 15 years, this team has a building in town where they live, and well, you don't have to live there, but your stuff is there, or live there, or your space is there. There's not a freaking porta potty. There's locker rooms, plumbing, water, running water, an air conditioner. What else do you want? Yeah, you need a heater. A building that this team and this league deserve, like for being around, for being an important part of WIFDDA, and a really important part of this community, even if enough people are not paying attention, which they should be. So I hope in the next 5 years we get a place of our own. And then other than that, we'll all be cyborgs. We're not going to stop playing. Half of us have metal in us already, so yeah.
So I'm not gonna lie, I have no idea how we're doing on time. So we're just gonna roll right into the audience Q&A. So if you have a question, raise your hand and be prepared to yell. I know y'all can be loud. I've seen y'all at your games. So I'm just gonna actually go sit over there and let y'all do the Q&A because you don't need me for that. Oh, y'all got this. Y'all are very capable folks. So, anything y'all want to share before we do the Q&A?
No, I love my team so much. I love you guys. My book is just a love letter to you ding-dongs.
Even though you wouldn't let me call it that.
My love letter to ding-dongs. No, like I just really admire like my whole team. I think they're incredible people on and off the track. I feel really lucky to be a part of this community, like super, super lucky. So, and also they came, like they're all here. That's yeah.
And thank you to everybody who's not on the team who showed up.
You guys are welcome to join.
That's amazing.
It's not a cult. We didn't.
They know all these things
outfits.
already, so.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any questions? Do we probably answer lots of? I don't know. Yeah, in the back.
So, you know, when you joined Roller Derby, you probably started playing vows and maybe traveling through leagues and whatnot a little bit, but what are some things that you've done with your derby league that maybe aren't strictly a derby bout, but like an experience or a place you went to that you're like, I didn't think skating was going to take me here?
The City Museum in St. Louis.
Already. It's a wondrous place, and St. Louis is one of my favorite teams to play.
The City Museum in St. Louis.
Yeah. Which is like just a beautiful, magical place. It's just look it up. I'm not going to do it justice to describe it, but it's like an adult playground, semi-dangerous, very cool. Also Australia. I got to go to Australia.
Oh yeah.
That escalated quickly, right? Yeah. When I was on the WF Today board, I got to go be an ambassador to the largest tournament in the world is actually in Adelaide, Australia, where they do 4 tracks constantly for 4 days, and it's every team in Oceania. That was sweet. That's why I came back after a year off.
I've been to Buffalo.
It's also sweet.
Actually, the Buffalo team has. Somebody bought them a building. And they have 2 floors and they have a barcade inside and like a sumo wrestling ring and a soccer. They got all kinds of stuff over there. Yeah, it's like right by the Labatt Blue plant. So Buffalo. Yeah, any more questions? Yeah.
How do you think of your derby names and what are yours?
I'm so glad you asked. So when I joined, I was I was working for the Boy Scouts and was deeply unhappy about it because it's literally the only job I could find at the time. And so my big FU to the Boy Scouts, particularly my Boy Scout co-workers who were former Eagle Scouts, I mean, I was like, maybe beast infection, maybe toxic shock syndrome. Like I'm like really down with period jokes. And I came up with Kegel Scout. That was my big, so, and it works well because like we're always squatting, a lot of our stuff up, right? Is that what it is? I'm not a doctor. Yeah, once it comes to you, I feel like you're like, yeah, that's who I am. I know you changed your real name, but I feel like I am Kegel Scout.
I stayed under my real name. I did have a derby name for like the first 3-ish years, I think, which was Alcatraz. For some reason, I decided my derby persona, because at the time we came up with taglines and bios, and the whole thing was that she was a prison escape artist. So
I thought you were going to say prison guard.
No, to the contrary.
Not fascist.
Yeah. And there is a picture of me with a shiv.
Yeah, I mean, what is the best derby name that you guys have ever heard?
Chainsaw.
Texas Chainsaw Ass Kicker? But now it's just Chainsaw.
Oxford Coma.
Oxford Coma. What?
Dolly Parton.
Dolly Farton. So good. Yeah.
Yes! Great Wall of China, and I was at a meeting once where she had to introduce herself, and the room was silent.
There was the guy from, what's the guy from Good Day Columbus, the Zach Morris guy?
Cameron Fontana.
Cameron Fontana. He came to the warehouse one time to do a morning news clip, and I was doing marketing, or I don't know, but I was the person who's interviewing. This is like 6:30 a.m. and people are skating circles, and he's like, "What's your derby name?" And I was like, "Oh, it's Kegel Scout." And he kept saying it, and then the anchors were like, "Cameron, I don't think you know what that word means." It was like 6:30 a.m. It was perfect. Yeah, Jeff.
What was the derby name you gave the editor who was Tyler?
Strangling modifier. I am not good at grammar. I went to public school, but my partner went to private Catholic school, and so she usually covers the grammar in our household. But things were not going well, and Tyler kept catching. He was like, "This is a dangling modifier. This is a dangling modifier." I still don't know what that is. So we named him the strangling modifier and put it in the footnotes. And he was really excited about that. Yeah. What is a dangling modifier? Tell me how to make it like yeah, Lemon.
No, what's the thing like Mark?
Oh, yeah.
We'll talk later.
Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. Yeah.
I'll just share, I joined Roller Derby in year 3. So these girls here are all veterans, Amy also, and so to add on to the introduction that they said at the beginning, they didn't win games. That's exactly what I was told. Oh, come on and play with us. We don't win games, but we win the after party.
Well, didn't you guys have to like drink a beer in the middle of the game if the penalty bill told you that?
Not
We won all the
here.
after parties, all good at that.
My answer to that question earlier was going to be that I am very proud of the fact that we are sticks in the mud, and we once made shirts that said, "Ohio, we don't do that here," in response. Because, yes, we're classy.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Did we also once have t-shirts that said we're a drinking team with a derby problem, or did I make that up?
You made that up, or it happened before me, either of which could be true.
Those did exist, I just don't think they were ours.
Thank you so much for your time tonight. There are copies of the book around if you want to buy it. We'll sign it. It feels silly, but we'll do it. And also, like, these people are all in the book. You should get their autographs too. Yeah, this was really fun. You want to say anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.